Hello. Tonight our lesson is on clearing the fractions. Clearing the fractions is a technique that we use in solving equations. Now it's important to note that this technique of clearing the fractions only works for equations. In other words, expressions that have an equal sign. That's why they're called equations, because they have an equal sign. All right? If it does not have an equal sign, we would call it an expression, like this one. Okay, there's no equal sign there. So that's an expression. And the reason that it only works for equations is that in an equation, you really have two quantities. You have a quantity that's on one side of the equation, and you have a quantity that's on the other side. And those two quantities, by virtue of being separated by the equal sign, are equal in value. So if I multiply one side of an equation by 20 and multiply the other side by 20, they're still going to be equal. If I add 10 to one side and add 10 to the other side, they're still going to be equal. So we can manipulate both sides of an equation and still keep them equal as long as we do the same operation to both sides. However, if I take an expression, if I multiply it by 20, the value of that expression is now changed. It's now 20 times greater than it used to be. So this technique does not work for that, only for equations. So let's get to it. All right, so here's our equation, and what we can do to solve this equation would be typically to subtract the 1/2 from both sides, and then we would have to deal with the 3/4 x and multiply both sides by 4/3, all right? So you could still solve this equation without clearing the fractions. But what clearing the fractions does is we choose a number to multiply each side of the equal sign so that the denominators cancel. All right, so we want to pick a number so that when we multiply, the 4 will cancel into it, the 2 will cancel into it, and the 8 will cancel into it. In other words, we want a number that all three go into evenly. So what do you think? What would be a number that 2, 4, and 8 would all multiply evenly into? Well, let's see. How about 8? Right? Because 4 times 2 would be 8. 2 times 4 is 8, and 8 times 1 is 8. So let's multiply by the least common denominator for 4, 2, and 8, which is 8. All right, so I'm going to multiply both sides of the equal sign by 8. That means I'm going to multiply 3/4 x by 8. I'm going to multiply 1/2 times 8, and I'm going to multiply 1/8 times 8. Now, when I multiply by 8, it's really 8 over 1, right? Okay, so 8 over 1 times 3 over 4x, the 8 and 4 will cancel, and I'll get a 2 there. Okay, and then here 2 and 8 will cancel. I'll get a 4 where the 8 was. And here the 8's both cancel and make 1s. Okay, so let's simplify what we have. We're going to have 2 times 3x, which would be 6x. See that? 2 times 3 is 6, and I still have my x. Here I have 1 times 4 in the numerator, 1 times 1 in the denominator, so that's going to just be 4. And on the other side, the 8's canceled, so now I just have 1. So look what happened to my equation. By multiplying all the terms on both sides by the least common denominator, 8, I cleared my equations, I canceled them, and look how much simpler my equation has now become. Now it's a simple two-step equation where I can subtract 4 from each side, and then divide both sides by 6. So x would equal negative 3 over 6, and that reduces to negative 1/2. There it is. All right, so clearing the fractions is a technique we use to get rid of fractions, to make our equations easier to solve. All right, let's try this one. Let's clear the fractions. Let's pick a number that 5, 8, and 4 all multiply into. In other words, the LCD. What would the LCD be? 24? No. How about 40? Now, if you don't pick the LCD, if you pick any common denominator, it will still clear the fractions, but you'll just end up with bigger coefficients. So, okay, let's multiply every term by 40, which is really 40 over 1. Okay, at this point, why don't you pause your video, cancel out all common factors, and see what you get. Welcome back from pausing the video. Let's cancel our common factors and see what we get. 5 cancels 8 times into 40. 8 cancels 5 times into 40. 4 cancels 10 times into 40. So we end up with 8 times 2x, which is 16x, minus 5 equals 3 times 10 is 30. How'd you do? Did you get that far? Okay, good. So from here, it's a simple two-step equation. Add 5 to both sides. So 16x equals 35. And now divide both sides by 16. So x would equal 35/16. And just leave your answer as an improper fraction. All right, how you doing so far? All right, let's go on. Read some books.